So, welcome to the SanderFAQ. This is where I answer your questions, things that people ask me fairly often, and one that I get now and then is, why are there no elves or dwarves in your books, Brandon? I got this one way more earlier in my career. When I was first starting to publish, we were still pretty deeply in Tolkien's shadow. And Harry Potter had just come out, which used some of the kind of classical fantasy races, giants, dragons, elves, things like this. And I remember writing an essay for my school magazine called Kill the Elves in the late 90s, because during that time, I was really getting tired of the Tolkien-esque world building. Not that there weren't great books that did it. I mean, I'm very fond of Sword of Shannara. I'm very fond of Thomas Covenant the Unbeliever, which is a very Tolkien-inspired sort of thing. There were just a lot of them back then. Even you can look at some Tad Williams as being very Tolkien-inspired. These are all the great fantasy epics from the 80s and early 90s. Even, I would say, Robert Jordan started very much in that sort of Tolkien-esque sort of air. He didn't really have the elves and the dwarves, but he did do the sort of quest fantasy. If you read Eye of the World, you'd be like, wow, I can really see the Tolkien influences here. The Myrddraal feel an awful lot like the Black Riders that Frodo is hiding from in The Lord of the Rings. And so I, as a young writer, I actually wrote an essay on my website that got me in a lot of trouble early on, where I talked about how Tolkien ruined fantasy, which was very clickbaity in the days before we understood clickbait. It was extra clickbaity because if you read it, the answer was Tolkien was so good at what he did that we all ended up copying him for a long time. He didn't actually ruin fantasy. That was just a clickbait title. But regardless, as I was kind of deciding what I was going to do to make my career, like what did I want to be the hallmarks of what a Sanderson book is, I wanted to be of that generation that was stepping more outside of Tolkien's shadow. I often talk about him as Grandpa Tolkien. That's because I kind of see a large generation of writers who did a lot of cool things with some Tolkien-esque inspirations. I mean, Robert Jordan's one of my favorite writers ever, and it started in a very Tolkien-esque sort of mode. But then I saw myself as the generation who grew up reading those people. I bounced off Tolkien the first time I tried to read Lord of the Rings when I was a kid. It just was too dense for me. I have since read and appreciated it. In fact, as I'm recording this in late 2025, I'm rereading Tolkien right now, doing the audiobooks that Andy Serkis reads. Highly recommend them. They're wonderful. But in the late 90s, I'm like, can't we get away from this? Fantasy should be the most imaginative genre. It's the genre where you can do anything. As soon as you start doing weird stuff, you become fantasy, and you're ours. And so I thought, well, I want to have a hallmark of my writing be that it's more human-focused than fantastical creatures-focused. And if I'm going to be doing fantastical creatures, I want to try and come up with my own. I want to have some new fantasy races that don't just feel like elves with another name, or dwarves with another name, or things like that. And turns out this is actually really hard to do. Coming up with something that has the weight and awesomeness of a dragon that isn't a dragon is very difficult. And I ended up just saying, I like dragons, I'm putting dragons in. So that's the one that I decided to bend on eventually because, I mean, dragons, right? But as I was developing the worlds, this is why you'll see that as I began, for instance, the first book in the Cosmere being Elantris, it's very human-focused. The fantasy race that's in there is the Seons. And I built this idea of these little bits of pieces of the various shards that would have different interactions with the people based on where they were, more along the lines of kind of classical fae. Is where kind of the Seons and the Spren and all the different various incarnations that you'll find across the Cosmere. And I wanted to have them feel a little more alien, yet also delve into that idea that fantasy is very good at, that even if something feels very alien at first, people are people and they will feel like people. And that's a interesting balance to try to walk, where you want them to be empathetic and sympathetic, and you want readers to be like, oh, as odd as this floating ball of light is, as a different sort of alien species, this floating ball of light is indeed a person and has passions, and that I can understand, even if what they're passionate about is different from what I might be passionate about, the existence of passion connects us. And so that was my focus in those early books, was coming up with something that felt a little different. Now, the kind of corollary to the story is, after I got published, I started to think, why am I so down on what people love to do? Right? Like, I don't want to be the person that is like, hey, stop having fun. There's that famous meme. Stop enjoying things. If people want to write about elves and dwarves, is there anything wrong with that if they enjoy it? And I realized I was being a bit snobbish. So I kind of look back on that Kill the Elves essay, which just talks about, hey, let's move on from Tolkien's races, with a measure of embarrassment now. This started in the early or the late 2000s, where I said, you know what? Who cares? If someone wants to write about that and they write a good book, I'm going to enjoy that book, even if, it is doing something new with some of these classic races as opposed to going a different direction. And I came around kind of full circle to write what you love. What I love is experimenting with what a fantasy book can be and the boundaries of what magic can do and what we call magic, what we call science. I like pushing that extent of world building. Other people like saying, hey, we've got this great grand tradition of these fantasy races from real mythology and lore that we get to play with in our fantasy books and approach them from new directions and say new things. That's equally valid, and people write lots of awesome books using that. So I've come around to where it's like, you know what, Brandon, even you put dragons in your books. So I no longer feel like we need to kill the elves or anything like that. I feel like, write your book. Read your book. Read what you love. Write what you love. And there is room to do new things even still, all these years later, with some of these ideas that Tolkien approached back in the 50s and 60s.